Could read the roll.
Tierney, did the pledge?
What?
You did the pledge?
Yeah.
Okay.
If you want to, well, let me just ask if we could just start with Jennifer, if we want to just do a brief introduction.
Sure. I'm Jennifer Ramsey with the Department of Revenue Administration. I'm their tax policy counsel.
Patrick Hackley with DNCR.
Chris Fife, representing New Hampshire Timberland Owners Association.
Good morning, Matt Mayberry, CEO of the New Hampshire Home Builders Association.
Mark Brady, Coas County Administrator.
Representative Arnold Davis, representing the state in Milan, New Hampshire.
Representative Mike Willett, Colas District 3.
Raymond Gorman, Municipal Association, County Commissioner, District 3.
Representative Jim Tierney, Coas District 1.
Charlie Levesque, licensed forester and president of consulting forestry business.
And Senator Dave Rochford is excused along with Mike Phelps. So missing would be Eric Murphy. Has everybody had a chance to review the minutes from March 6th? And if they have, could I get a motion to accept?
So moved.
Second? Oh. Okay, Charlie, get the second. All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Yes, sorry.
These minutes have no attendees list on it. And so I'm assuming you should have the attendees from the meeting listed as we should for the minutes from this meeting.
I agree. So can I get a motion as amended to add the list of attendees?
Second.
Mayberry, second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Okay, we have two presentations today. Both are carbon developers who are here to speak on how their programs work. First one is Mr. Dylan Jenkins from Finite Carbon. If the people in the gallery would like to come over here and sit so you can see that, you're welcome to do that. So, Mr. Jenkins, thank you for being here.
Mr. Chairman, could I set the stage a little
Yes.
bit?
Sure.
So remember, we had a presenter last month, and that presenter was from Family Forest Carbon Program, one of the programs designed for small forest landowners. Today, we have two different presenters. The first, if you remember from my presentation back in November, Finite Carbon is probably, well, and Dylan can tell us, but Finite Carbon is probably the largest developer of large projects. In fact, I just saw something of a new project in Maine that's over 200,000 acres. And so they work with very large projects in carbon development. And then we'll hear from Sarah Ford later, another program that is really focused on small landowners, although I know you kind of stray into that next category of landowners, and you'll tell us about that. But just to set the context, so we will have seen kind of the full suite, not everybody, but a good variety of them by the time the presentations are done today. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Charlie. It's all you.
All right. Thank you. Well, good morning. Thank you for allowing me to remote in this morning. And just, truth in advertising, I'm not going to be talking about finite carbon in our program so much as I really want to keep my comments laser focused on the issues that I think that are key and germane to the committee thinking about taxation of forest carbon. So, the finite bona fides will trickle through there, and I'll highlight those when it's appropriate, but I really want to keep this focused on the things that I think that are important for you to consider. So I'm going to share my screen and I can see myself. Yep. Okay, great. It's up. So just a disclaimer, our lawyer isn't in the room, but just to let you know, I'm not a lawyer. I'm not a tax accountant. I am a forester. I'm a SAF certified forester. I'm a member of the Association of Consulting Foresters. I've been in this industry for 2 decades. Been with Finite pretty much since the beginning. The Nature Conservancy for 7 years, and about 5 of that working on forest carbon projects. So that was back in the aughts. So I've seen a lot, and seen the good, bad, and the ugly of this market. And I will not sugarcoat anything with you. I'll give you the straight news as I see it. Just really quick, a little bit about Finite. Actually, the agenda first. I'm going to tell you a little bit about us and who we are in the market. Go through some quick carbon market basics. Again, not defining all terms, but the things that I think are really important for you to consider if you're thinking about taxing forest carbon as a forest product. A little bit about project development and carbon sales, and then some discussion, really some recommendations or just some things to highlight that I think you ought to be aware of and thinking about. So just real quick about who we are. We are a leading developer of forest carbon offsets in North America. This is a timeline of us since 2009. What really pops out is that we're not just a project developer. We actually have authored many of the protocols or the methodologies, the recipes that developers use in the U.S. and now Canada. We authored the first improved forest management protocol for the American Carbon Registry. That's the predominant voluntary program in the United States. We registered the very first project for the California Compliance Program back in 2012. That actually was a project with the Down East Lakes Land Trust in Maine. It was a New England project. And then, on through to today, we've co-authored the IFM protocol for Canada. We actually authored ACR's first protocol that relies on remotely sensed data. That was our small business line called CORE, which we've spun off last year. Similar to the Family Forest Carbon Program or Forest Carbon Works, just a small landowner opportunity. And right now we're wrapping up a protocol for a province in Canada for Alberta. So we are 100% focused on improved forest management projects in North America. And this is a map of our projects. You can see that we're very concentrated in Appalachia in New England and coastal Alaska, few in the lake states. There's a lot of demographic diversity. Just about everybody that can develop a carbon project has developed a carbon project with us, including corporates, family forest landowners. Again, those tend to be smaller landowners. We developed and spun off that business line last year. We have some very high net worth families that we work with. Charlie, that was the project, the Bucks that you were referring to in Maine. We also work with the Pingrees and some others. We've had quite a bit of success with indigenous communities, including the Passamaquoddy tribe in Maine, the Colville and Spokane tribes in Washington State, and then several in coastal Alaska, and now also in Alberta. Our first projects were with NGOs and land trusts, which probably isn't surprising to you. Their mission and the way that they manage their forests is very well aligned with sequestering carbon. And then also we've done a lot of work with TMOs and REITs, mainly Manulife, Lime Timber, the Forest Land Group, which is now Aurora, and a few others. So that's a little bit about finite carbon. So I'm going to dive right into some carbon market basics. When we talk about the carbon market, we're talking about the compliance and the voluntary market. And I'm sure you've heard this before, but it's important I think, to recap. The compliance markets are when you have a political jurisdiction, usually a state or a country, they establish a cap on their greenhouse gas emissions and industries that are emitters within that jurisdiction. The government issues credits Those are used by emitters as a cost containment mechanism. Those offsets or credits are usually trading at a discount to another instrument that's called an allowance in those systems. And again, those companies use those carbon credits against their emissions obligation within that program. U.S. examples that include forestry, not all compliance programs do, would be the California program, which is also linked with the province of Quebec. That's called the Western Climate Initiative. Used to be a lot larger before 2010. Then it atrophied, shrunk, and now it's starting to grow again. Washington State also has a program that's in the process of linking with the WCI. A lot of the focus, though, and that's kind of run its course. I mean, it may not have there are a lot of legacy projects, including 3 that we developed in New Hampshire, and that would be the notorious Connecticut Lakes project. One of our first was with the New England Forestry Foundation, Hersey Mountain Wilderness, and Lakes Region Conservation Trust. But a lot of the focus now, especially since about 2019, 2020, outside of California, obviously, folks that are outside the state of California can develop a compliance project and sell it into California. But most of the focus now in the U.S. and in North America writ large is in the voluntary market. The voluntary market is a global market, and it's composed of a set of sub-markets by geography and by project type. You know, forest carbon is just one of, depending on whether you're a lumper or a splitter, 120, plus or minus different carbon project types. Forestry is a bit unique in that it's something called, falls within a subcategory called nature-based solutions. That would include like afforestation, reforestation, tree planting. You'll probably hear more about that from Sarah later on with their program through Chestnut Carbon, which has been very successful, and some other types. But there's a lot of focus on improved forest management projects because landowners that have standing stock, standing timber can participate in those programs. And by committing to sustainable forestry, extending their rotations, committing more lands to uncut buffers along streams, that's the way that they sequester additional carbon. Buyers like those types of projects because there's a lot of co-benefits associated with these projects. But they are notoriously difficult to measure and monitor and report on and verify. So there's a lot of tension within the market with regard to improved forest management projects, but they are very desirable. And they're very desirable within North America in particular, just because of our property rights and tenure rights. There's a lot of places throughout the world that are developing nature-based solution projects, but because of issues with tenure rights and ownership rights of the carbon, there's a lot more risk on the buy side. So North America is kind of a sweet spot, and it's a good place to be to develop these projects. So voluntary buyers are non-regulated entities. Again, they're not compelled to buy because a sovereign or a jurisdiction is telling them that they have to buy. They're driven by their stakeholders, board members, and ultimately consumers, folks like you and me, that are saying, listen, you need to reduce or eliminate your carbon footprint. And these voluntary buyers, one of the ways that they're doing that is they're buying carbon offsets to reduce and eliminate their carbon footprint through the production of their goods and services. These credits are issued by numerous registries, like the American Carbon Registry, Verra, Climate Action Reserve. There's a new one on the scene, Isometric, that also has an IFM protocol. These are the ones that you're going to hear about and see primarily in the United States and in New Hampshire potentially. So who purchases credits? It used to be that a lot early on, leading up till about 2019, 2020, it was really these large trading firms. Think the oil majors, folks like Shell, BP, that used to own finite until actually just early last year. Folks that were willing to buy large quantities of offsets and keep them on their books. They would pay lower prices, but they would take on all of the risk. And that was an important liquidity function and stability for the market, that you had these large buyers that would come in. They've kind of run their course. They're still there. Shell's still a big buyer of offsets, but they're not the players that they used to be. But they were very important in the earlier days of the voluntary market. They also have shorter timelines. They can move very quickly. Again, they can buy a lot of volume very quickly. But again, the downside is that they just aren't paying the top dollar that some of the others are, like intermediaries. This is actually where we trade. Most of our offsets these days are moved through intermediaries. They're not just brokers, they're broker dealers and consultancies that serve the next one that I'll show you in a minute, which is the naturals. The folks that actually buy these offsets that retire them against their emissions. Intermediaries today serve a very important, again, liquidity function. They're doing due diligence on behalf of all of the buyers, including some of the big ones. Everybody, talks about Microsoft. Microsoft does their own due diligence, but they also engage intermediaries. In the case of Microsoft, it's an intermediary called Carbon Direct that does also kind of saddles up beside them and helps them do their due diligence. But this is where a lot of the volume moves now. The volume is mid-range purchases, which is a very large range of about, and actually it's hundreds of tons to hundreds of thousands of tons. The price point is much better usually than the trading firms, but it's going to be lower than if you were selling directly to an end-use buyer or natural, because these folks are making, they're making a margin. They're going to get paid for their work. We have a medium timeline, and again, they serve a very important function in helping the naturals do their work. When folks think about buyers, though, usually when you're here like just last week. I mean, and this week, Microsoft was in the news, notably so because they're saying that they're pausing their purchasing, and we've already seen some of the ripples, throughout the market from that. But this is usually what folks think about: Google, Starbucks, Disney, Coke, Delta, United Airlines. All the folks. These are the folks that are buying. They're not buying to hold and then to trade and sell to somebody else. They're buying because they're going to retire these offsets against their own emissions. They're going to pay the highest price. So this is sort of the brass ring. This is what everybody wants to do. But frankly, it's, we sell to all of these folks, the trading firms, intermediaries, and naturals. It's great when you can sell directly to a natural. We just had a very large transaction with Apple on one of our projects in Tennessee. But it's a bit of a rarity. Usually you're selling more through the intermediaries. How do buyers purchase? So this is buyers that are buying credits, and we're going to get into kind of the nuance, and things are going to get a little, weedy very quickly. But I think the weeds are where you're going to live when you're thinking about taxing carbon and taxing carbon credits. So buyers are usually, they're buying spot purchases. They're buying credits that have already been issued. They're sitting in an account somewhere, either through ACR or Vera, and they're ready to go. And these are relatively simple agreements, a couple of pages long, that really just talk about the volume, the vintage, the price, and the delivery date. Pretty straightforward. More though, and we have a bit of a mix. Buyers are looking at they're looking ahead, and they're looking at their 2030, 2035, 2040 emissions targets. And so they're trying to line up volume. And the way that they do that is through long-term offtake agreements, kind of supply agreements. These are forward purchases of not yet issued volume. It may include some spot, but they're looking ahead and they're lining up, and sometimes buyers want to, they really want to associate with a project, and they want to lock up the entire project. This creates price certainty for the seller and for the buyer, for that matter, but it creates volume certainty for the buyer. So it can be a win-win. Obviously, it depends on the commercial terms, but this first 6 projects that Finite did in the voluntary market were actually all offtake agreements with BP. So these were projects where it was like we locked in a price and a price escalator. It was good for the landowner because they knew they knew that they were going to sell their volume, and they knew what price they were going to get. And likewise, BP knew that they were going to get the volume, and they had the price locked in too. So the downside of that, of course, is if the market goes up, you're locked in at a certain price and the landowners are going to make that upside. But likewise, if the market goes down, the landowner's got the floor. So it just evens out the bumps for everybody. And we're starting to see the market swing more toward offtake agreements for improved forest management projects. But spot purchases are still very, very, very important. Now, this is, I've seen some of the scuttlebutt, not just in New Hampshire, but also in Maine and West Virginia and other places. It's like folks want to talk, well, what's the price? I think that's a bit of a distraction. It's not so much what's the price, but it's where can you get the information? And the fact of the matter is these are not exchange traded transactions. These are all over the counter, party to party, private transactions. And a lot of that information is reported, but it's reported privately from the developed folks like us to industry and intel, agencies like MSCI and Quantum Commodity Intelligence and Abatable, and they're available through subscription, which isn't cheap. But that information can be available, but it tends to be, anonymized, rolled up. You can get on quarterly webinars. MSCI puts on excellent ones, and you can see what the trends are, and even the trends are by geography and by forest project type, like IFM. But if you want that granular information, you're either going to have to get it by subscribing to these agencies, or you're going to have to compel it, by having landowners report it directly to you. But I will say that, this information is, it's highly prized. It's very private. It's proprietary, and it's not given away. All right. So want to draw a distinction between, we talk about project development, but project development is really broken up into two, kind of main pieces. One is the commoditization, and that is the development of the project. That is the measuring, the quantification, the monitoring, the reporting, the verification, all kind of the nuts and bolts, muddy boots on the ground part of developing a carbon project. And again, the unit of trade, I just want to make sure this is one thing I'll define, is that when we talk about a credit or an offset, we're talking about 1 metric ton of CO2 equivalent. It's, wood that's in that tree. But that is different from commercialization. Commercialization is the marketing transaction of the carbon or the credits. And one of the things that I've run into is I've talked with folks like you, legislators and other folks that are working on policies. Sometimes they blur the line between these two things, between commoditization, which is the development of the commodity itself, the thing that's going to be sold, and the selling of that commodity. And it does get weedy, and I'll show you why in a minute. They're not necessarily the same thing. There are numerous types of deal structures to commoditize and commercialize forest carbon, and the deal structure dictates how and when a landowner is paid for their forest carbon. And the commercialization actually can happen, people think about commercialization kind of like we develop the carbon offset and then we sell it. But commercialization can actually happen before you ever develop the carbon offset, or it can happen during, or it can happen after, or it can happen all through that time. And those are all potential revenue events. And so that's what I'm trying to bring home to you is that, what are you taxing? What event are you taxing? And again, we'll get into that in a bit more detail real quick. Actually, this is my closing slide. So, and I hope I've got this right. So House Bill 123, timber tax law, it was, my understanding is that it was proposed to level the playing field for local communities to receive benefit from the sales of carbon as carbon credits that was really being reallocated from timber, conventional wood products, to carbon credits. And I don't think it's a stretch at all to say that a carbon credit is definitively a forest product. That carbon in a carbon credit, it does represent a commitment to deliver or supply a specific volume of wood. Wood equals carbon equals a credit. That's an equivalency. So in my opinion, I'm speaking on behalf of myself, I think it is reasonable in principle that a state with a timber tax law would also tax carbon credit sales since they're another wood product. I don't think that's tough. That's not a leap. I think what gets really tough though is that there's some things that anybody who's considering taxing carbon really needs to take into consideration. One is just equitable timing. Not at the time of, I've seen this proposed before, notably in West Virginia, time of commercialization and not commoditization. But that's not the, commercialization is not the revenue event. That's not when revenue is generated. And sometimes, we've been in the unfortunate position of actually having to terminate some projects because we couldn't sell the credits. Now, thankfully, the landowner was out, not out any dollars or any money. We absorbed that cost, but that's a really kind of stark and important example of where commoditization does not equal commercialization. We developed the carbon offsets. The carbon offsets queued into accounts. They weren't sold. So they're two very different things. The other question is what is being taxed and when? It isn't, I think a lot of folks that think about taxing carbon are thinking about these spot transactions. You develop a commodity and you sell it, just like you harvest a tree and it goes to the mill and you get paid. There's a lot of different ways that carbon is monetized. You talk about, in some cases, it's not, the landowner isn't really even getting paid for the commodity. They're getting paid for a lease on their timber and carbon rights. They never see a payment on a per unit basis for a credit. They're getting paid for, the carbon and timber that's in their forest. And it's completely, the keys are handed off to somebody else to monetize that. The landowner's paid kind of a lump sum for those timber and carbon rights, or maybe over a period of time. Maybe the landowner is paid an incentive or sign-on payment for entering a program, and then later on, as the carbon is commoditized and commercialized and sold, then the landowner may receive a per unit payment. For offtake agreements, again, the landowner may receive an advance fee, and then when the offsets are actually delivered, they'll receive the balance, payment on delivery. Or it could be a combination of some or all of these. And this isn't like hypothetical. This is actually how the deal structures are quite complex. Now, back to finite, ours really aren't. We don't do advanced payment. We don't buy timber carbon rights. We actually, one of the distinctives that finite carbon has is that our landowners always retain the rights to their timber and their carbon. When the commodity is created, the offsets go into the landowner's account, not into our account. And the landowner actually controls when they sell their carbon, to whom they're going to sell their carbon, and at what price. Now, with our advice and our guidance and partnership, but that's not the way that a lot of programs work. A lot of programs work where their fingers are a lot deeper into the carbon and the timber rights, and all of that has pretty important impact on when and how a landowner is getting paid for their carbon. They're not just necessarily getting paid for a commodity like a carbon credit. They might be getting paid for their carbon and timber rights. So that's the nickel tour. And I hope that, again, I kept my comments very, very concentrated because I think these are the things, at least to me, when I'm thinking about taxation of carbon, that I think these are the points that are the most important. So with that, I'll end my comments and open it up to questions.
Thank you very much for your presentation.
You're welcome.
Do we have any questions? I have some, but I'd like to let you guys go first. Yes.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, sir. Thank you for the continuing education. I spent a few hours last night learning all about this, and We're gonna talk about biochar, and we're gonna talk about, the carbon reduction versus removal and blah, blah, blah. So I've learned a lot. Even on your own website, so you talk about, because if we're talking about the taxation, thus the value of carbon sequestered forest, you talk about a little bit about the carbon reduction credits and the carbon removal credits. And you folks even say that it's almost at a conflict of interest, that the investors don't want the carbon reduction that was stated has a better green effect long-term, but the investors are more interested in the carbon removal credits. Could you talk a little bit about those two credits and how they kind of, contradict each other? If we're looking at a view of taxation and the value, what the investors have
Yeah.
versus the social thoughts on that, please.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. So improved forest management projects are a hybrid. Maybe it'd be helpful to talk about. So what the question that was brought up is, what's the distinction in either the conflict, or I would say the complementary nature between what are removals and reductions. Removals are, every year a forest is growing. It's putting, you look at the tree, you look at tree rings, every one of those rings represents an annum or a year of wood growth. From the time that you start a project and that tree is growing or that forest is growing, all of the net annual growth, the biological growth, minus natural mortality, minus whatever the landowner is harvesting, that net growth, those are removals. A reforestation project, if you're taking bare ground and you're planting trees, that's a pure removals project because there are no trees there to claim any kind of reductions project. So that's probably the easiest way to think about a removals project is a reforestation project where there aren't any trees and you're planting trees. All of that growth, 100% of that is removals. IFM is a bit of a hybrid because you get credit, a landowner gets credit both for that annual growth, but also they get some credit for their standing stocks. And this comes into this, if you're reading up on removals and reductions, then you're reading about baselines. And that this is where all of the, the great debate is. It's this, what would a landowner have done in the absence of a project? If they weren't getting paid for the carbon, ostensibly they would have done something else. An economically rational landowner would NPV maximize, they would harvest more timber than they are right now. And that's the baseline. That's what they're compared against. And if they're in the project and they're getting paid for carbon, then they're going to have more carbon in their forest. And it's that delta between what they're doing in the carbon project versus what they would do if they weren't in the carbon project. That's the additionality. And a lot of that in the early days of a project is the reduction credits that's coming from the standing stocks. It's coming from trees that are already standing, not new growth. There's a lot of debate about that baseline. And I think it's fair. Some of that debate is very fair because there's a lot of ways that baseline can be, moved up or down. And it's not hard to figure out. The more you push that baseline down, the more delta there is between the with project scenario and without project scenario, which is more offsets, which times dollars potentially could be more, more revenue for everybody. But there's been a lot of debate, especially over the last 2 or 3 years, and I think it's been a healthy debate about how that baseline is established, which doesn't really have any impact on the removals credits. And this is why buyers really like removals, because there isn't any debate about them. Not really. I mean, it's just like, this is easy stuff. It's easy to understand. It's new growth. It's from the time that the landowner started the project. And there's a quality perception, real and perceived by buyers for removals. And that's translated into higher liquidity and higher pricing for removals, especially in improved forest management projects. So improved forest management projects yield both removals and reductions. They are serialized. In other words, we have a project and it issues those credits. We know how many by vintage, by year, by reporting period, how many are removals, how many are reductions. It's fair to say that the removals are more liquid and they demand a higher price. But the buyer ecosystem is extremely diverse. And we have a lot of folks that are price seeking, some surprisingly large buyers that are price seeking, and they're fine with reduction credits. Their budget doesn't allow them to buy removals. They're just fine, buying removals. A lot of folks buy both. So I wouldn't say that they're contradictory. Actually, I'd say that they're in a way complementary. And IFM projects are unique in that they yield both removals and reductions. And there's as a developer, we'd say it's much ado. It's carbon. If the baseline is scientifically sound and vetted. A ton is a ton is a ton. There really shouldn't be a difference in the market, but we're not a market maker. I mean, that's Microsoft and others are going to tell us what they think, and we're going to deliver. And if they want to pay a higher price and buy removals, then that's what we're going to sell them.
Follow up, Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
Thank you, sir. And I know it's hard because we're asking you to speak for the entire industry. There seems to be a lot of concern about the inflated baselines and kind of the verification of those forests and that creation of the baselines. What do you folks do as a business practice to guarantee the quality of the forests that are being asked to go into a sequestration type of program? What do you do to, like, say that I read the same article about the 212,000 acres up in Maine. How do you verify its worth?
Yeah. So all of the protocols that are we authored the original IFM protocol, but those protocols, it's not like we write the rules and then we get the fox in the hen house. I mean, those rules are extremely diligently vetted by peer review, and they're open for public comment. The ACR IFM protocol in particular has gone through 6 different phases of change, and it's responsive. It's responsive to most of the changes that from 2010 to 2024 were collections of errata and guidance, things that we found, as we were actually developing projects, things that needed to be, adjusted, changed, frequently asked questions that got integrated in. The big change, though, really happened with the version from 2.0 to the current version of 2.1, where all of this scrutiny on the credibility and the durability and the way that baselines are calculated, it was really a step function. It was a new way of looking at and moving to what's called a dynamic baseline. That's something that you guys may have heard of. So what we do, I mean, we develop to the protocol is what we do, and by necessity, all of our projects are independently audited by a third-party verifier. So they have to go through independent third-party verification and then additional scrutiny by the registry. In this case, for voluntary ACR, if it was compliance, it would go through the same process, an independent audit by a third-party verifier who's accredited by the Air Resources Board in California, and then ARB crawls all over it. They basically redo the entire verification. So it's a slog. I mean, it's a real process to go through. And back to the voluntary market, the 2.1 protocol is extremely prescriptive in the way that we develop that baseline. So it's called a comparable properties approach. It's a very prescriptive process where we have to go out and find comparable comps. Just like if you're selling your house and you've got to do a comparable market analysis and find like houses, similar square footage in the region that have sold within a certain time period. We go through the same process now if we're developing an IFM project under ACR 2.1. So that's what we do. And there used to be more wiggle room in terms of decision points in establishing that baseline, that's really been tightened up quite a bit now. And to the degree that we can't do this with all projects, but we're actually in the process of transitioning older projects that were developed before 2.1 into 2.1. Not all can, not all will. There's a grandfathering clause that I won't go into the details on that, but you can only go back so far. But that's what we're in the process of doing is retooling and modernizing older projects, but all new projects have to be developed to the current protocol.
Jim, may I ask one final follow-up, then I'll shut for a couple minutes?
Yes.
I still have more questions, but a couple minutes. So you mentioned one of the families you work with up in Maine beyond the Buck family. You mentioned the Pingree family. Is that as in like U.S. Representative Shelley Pingree?
It's big family.
Yeah, the Pingree heirs, there's the official owners are the Pingree heirs, and they've been owning, basically around 1 million acres of land for well over 150 years. And so there are many heirs, and Shelley Pingree is part of that family.
Okay. And the reason why I ask that is because I think it factors in the bigger national picture of that she's been lead sponsor of legislation federally that supports and leads towards the funding of carbon sequestration expansion of those programs, even to the point of the USDA guaranteeing loans to help expand this. So I just want to be fully transparent. Heard the name, caught my attention.
I'm not, have the Pingrees done a project, or maybe you're developing one for them? Because up until now, they don't have a project.
What I'll say is that just to back off from the Pingrees a bit, the market, the ARB and the voluntary market has been up and running, full tilt in the United States really since 2012. I mean, we're going on about 15 years. Anybody who has, at this point, that has significant forest assets has kicked the tires at least more, one or more times on, are they a fit for a carbon project? Including James Malone, Ted Turner, Stan Cranky, I mean, all of them. We've met some interesting cats, and they're all looking at this because they're all looking to see, the cost of owning and managing forests is not trivial, right? I mean, they're all, land, it's like, maybe we just go back to the basics. It's like, why are landowners doing this? Landowners are doing this because, most of them can't afford to just, own land and sit on it. The landowner needs to pay its way. Timber markets and conventional wood product markets are up and they're down and they're sideways. One of the great things about carbon, if it's aligned, and this one, I guess I will get a little bit salesy, is to say that, finite carbon, we only focus on forestry, and we are a company of foresters, and we work very hard to make sure that we develop carbon projects that are integrated in with and align with, the landowner's overall goals for owning and managing their forest lands. In other words, we don't want a carbon project to come in and drive the boat on silviculture or anything for that matter. We try to find a project that's aligned. Now, if a landowner wants to activity shift and they're like, well, they're going to optimize their carbon from year to year, and they're like, well, what is, it's pulpwood paying? Well, what if I keep it on the hoof another year or another 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 years and get paid for carbon? That's a rational thing for a landowner to do. Just like if, forget about carbon, I mean, if diversity of markets is a landowner's friend, right? I mean, you don't want to just be dependent on one pulp mill, in your region to move your wood. That's you're very vulnerable as a landowner to being able to pay the bills. What you want is you want a sawmill and you want a pulp mill and you want to, somebody, is buying, chips and if we have a carbon market, that's great too.
I
It's just
completely
a different place
get,
for landowners to be able to move their carbon.
I completely
I
get
got
that,
one
sir.
now,
It's just,
go ahead.
maybe you shouldn't be the lead sponsor of HR 5861 if your family can benefit from those sales. That's all I'm saying. And we're going to talk a little bit. I have other questions on as a seller of land, but
Yeah,
I'll
let me-
yield.
I have a question, actually. Thank you, Mr. Jenkins, for taking my question. Finite Carbon through Boreal Carbon, which I believe is their parent company, has ties to investors in Canadian timber. Now, the concern I have is there's money to be made in Canadian timber. One way to accomplish that is by putting New Hampshire timber into carbon. Is that a valid concern I should have? If our timber is all in carbon, it leaves a wide open market for Canada to not have any competition with us.
Oh, sir, I'm sorry. I'm not sure how to connect all the dots that you just did. I'm not able to draw those conclusions.
Yeah, okay. Chris?
Thank you. Thank you for the presentation. Couple of questions. First, could you just speak to it, and you mentioned this just in your last comment, but the compatibility, or if there's compatibility with growing higher quality or value timber for a landowner and having a carbon project?
Can you hit me with that again, please?
Our carbon projects, as a landowner with a carbon project, is that compatible with potentially growing higher value or quality timber on their land?
Oh yeah, yeah. I think if anything, it probably, you know, again, the devil, it truly is in the details here. But yes, and it depends on who you work with. It depends on the program. But I'd say that the things that lead to carbon offsets, not just sort of a one shot, but over a long period of time, would be extending rotations. You know, leaving more, you know, coarse woody debris. You know, wider than regulatory regulated or necessary buffers and SMZs. Yeah, focusing on quality for sure. I think it's reasonable to say that that it's compatible with higher quality timber products. The other thing too is that landowners do get some credit for harvested wood products that go into long-lived wood products. You actually get some carbon credit there. It tends to be de minimis in improved forest management projects, but it's not nothing. So, yeah.
So the long term, it would be safe to say that in a taxation situation like the severance tax or timber taxes based on value, when that timber is harvested, there would actually be a higher value of timber potentially than if it was harvested without the carbon project.
Yeah, I mean, again, we're I think we're grossly generalizing, but that's possible. Yeah, I mean, again, the goal. I can only speak for our company, but I think I speak for others. You know, the goal here is not to remove timber from conventional wood products. If anything, you know, and again, I'm a forester with 30 years of experience here. We want to see, you know, would be the answer, right? We want to see more, you know, more forests being utilized for all of their values, including carbon sequestration, but managed wisely, managed sustainably, managed for the long term. You know, the issue with most, you know, most landowners, I'm an Eastern forester. I've worked in Appalachia all my life. And, you know, most of the land in Appalachia and in New England, it isn't managed. It's high graded. You know, it's not professionally managed, except if it's TMOs or, you know, REITs or owned by a high net worth individual that can afford to. The thing about a carbon project, if it's judicious, if it's well thought out, if it's judiciously implemented, is it can really even out the bumps. If you think about it more as sort of like a forest conservation tool, it kind of slots in somewhere between, I'd say, like forest certification and a conservation easement. You know, these are not permanent. You know, it's that they don't. You know, you're not. You know, landowners sign up for a long period of time, but it's not forever. Forest certification puts a forest management layer of professionalism on that land, but a landowner can come and go, you know, year over year in forest certification. So I think if you look at it that way, it kind of slots in between. But a good forest certification program, the purpose of that is not to take, you know, land and wood out of production; it's to maintain it. And I think a good forest carbon program is designed with that same goal in mind.
And so my second question, specifically to timber tax, can you just speak to, are credits sold on specific trees, in the way that the timber harvest
No.
results in the sale of specific trees?
No, they're not. And scale is really important to keep in mind. And that's where it's easy to kind of get sideways. So when we are developing carbon, the closest thing that we get to it, like a, kind of a spatial or temporal, specificity is by the year that the carbon was produced. We call that a vintage, just like wine. And there's always a lag because it takes, a year, 2 years to quantify and measure and verify the carbon that's grown. So say, it's 2026, we have projects now that are issuing credits, but the vintage of those credits is usually like 24 or 25, because that's what we're measuring what's something that's already happened. But that's all of that carbon is across the entire project area. We're not able to say, that it came from this tree or even this stand or this compartment. It's across that entire project boundary.
Thank you.
Go ahead, Representative.
Thank you, Mr. Jenkins, for taking my question. One question that it's come up and we've talked a little bit about is the chain of custody of the credits, meaning when you sell a project, and how do we know that our natural resource in our area isn't being tied up for 100 years by a foreign adversary?
Yeah, so all the purpose of these registries, let's talk about the voluntary market. The purpose of the registries is to have transparency and, so that you can see exactly what's going on. What you can't see is party-to-party transactions, but you can see when tons have been issued, you can see when they've been retired, and you can see when they've been canceled. Cancellation is a bit of an oddball. That's like if you're terminating a project, then you would cancel a credit. But ultimately, whoever last holds the tons are going to retire those tons against their emissions obligation. Before that, I probably should have started with issuance. Whenever the tons are issued, and I just mentioned that, from like what we call a reporting period, we have projects every year they're issuing tons. These are public reports. You can go to the American Carbon Registry website, and there's a list of public reports. You can see what projects have been issued tons, and then you can see when tons have been purchased and retired. But what you can't see is the transactions that are happening on the way to retirement. So that's what you can see. Now, if you want to see anything more granular than that, then you would have to subscribe to somebody like MSCI or QCI, Quantum Carbon Commodity Intelligence, or Abatable, or one of these other folks, and you can see where these tons are going.
Just to follow up, I agree with you 100% that the transaction between the buyer and the seller, the money issue is private and should be kept private. But what would be wrong with the buyer or who's ever ending up with the carbon credits or that are going to end up retiring? What's the harm in knowing who actually owns them?
I don't know that there is.
Thank you.
We had Pat first.
Hi, Dylan. Patrick Hackley with the Department of Natural and Cultural Resources. Thanks for your presentation today. It was really well done. A couple of just broad questions at a very high level. I've often wondered when the carbon credit industry got rolling and they started registering owners that were under a conservation easement, who are required to have a written forest management plan and manage sustainably, how the additionality question is addressed.
Yeah.
And then I had one quick follow-up after that. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah, it's a great question. So again, sorry, to use trite cliche, but the devil's in the details. Some conservation, it depends on what the conservation easement says about forest management, how specific it is on like stocking retention, and what can and can't be harvested. So we have to go through those easements with a fine tooth comb. Some easements are written very generically, and so it's just that there has to be a forest management plan that's reviewed and approved by, you know, whoever the easement holder is. Others, and then you start layering in that. Then it's like, oh, it has to be reviewed and approved, but it also has to be third-party certified. Oh, it has to be reviewed, the forest management plan has to be reviewed and approved, and it has to be third-party certified, and there are stocking retention credits. That's where it really starts to kick in for us, because if you have to maintain a certain stocking level, then that is absolutely going to impact the baseline in an improved forest management project. Likewise, if there are no harvest restrictions for like aesthetic buffers, wider than regulatory minimum SMZs, elevation requirements, those sorts of things, we have to include that as non-additional carbon in the baseline. So that's how we look at it. I will say though that's sort of the mechanical part of it. Then you fast forward to today, where there's additional scrutiny, by the buyers and there are now rating agencies that are out. That's fairly new. And they're layering on top of not only what you can do, but what you would do. The market there's no question, the market has evolved. The bar has raised, and there are projects that we've done in the past where carbon was counted that you couldn't count today, under both the current version of the protocol and additional, perceived, perceptions and scrutiny. That's the way these things work. It's not that we did anything wrong in the past. We did it exactly, the way that we should have done it, to the way that the buyers and the market wanted it. But the market has, evolved, and the not regulations, but the requirements have tightened, and that's where we're at. And I'd say what that will result in is it's hopefully higher quality projects relative to what there was before, but it's going to result in fewer projects. There's no doubt about that. I mean, the pipeline of projects has really tightened for us, and I think all that was by design. So yeah, I'll leave it at that.
I have
And what was the follow up?
Oh, good.
One more. Thank you for indulging. This one has come up during the debate here in New Hampshire, when we all learned about the details. Everything was laid open as far as the agreement in the North Country on the Connecticut Lakes property. It's a 100-year agreement, and from what I understand, when the current landowner wants to sell the property and they haven't finished the 100-year agreement, that the buyer has to purchase the land with the agreement intact, or pay an exit fee or some kind of a fee to say, well, I want to buy that land, but I don't want to participate in the carbon credit program. So there's some kind of a fee that's paid. And then the broader question is, because there's a hitch to buying that land, from a real estate perspective, that would be, in my mind, considered an encumbrance. But some of the legal debates say it's not an encumbrance because you can get out of it. Can you address that nuance?
I'm not an appraiser either.
It's a legal question that's come up, and I've never really heard a cogent answer to that.
Yeah, well, I don't think it's that tough of a legal question. It is an encumbrance. There's no question about it.
Okay.
I think we've interfaced with a lot of appraisers. Spent a lot of time with them, and so it's fair to say that a carbon project is both an asset and a liability. There's no question it's an encumbrance. And if the new buyer, it works a couple of different ways. Carbon projects are now, pretty well known. I mean, these aren't great mysteries anymore. Anybody who's in the land business knows about carbon projects. And they've also gotten, much wiser about just saying, oh, it's not just a carbon project, it's a California ARB project, and that has a 100-year commitment. Or it's a voluntary project, and that has a 40-year fixed commitment. So it's not just that it's a carbon project, it's what kind of carbon project is it? So I think the buyers and the sellers now are on more of a, there's no kind of gotchas. Maybe there still was 5 years ago where it's like, oh, didn't know there was a carbon, I bought that property with it, that it just, there was a carbon project on it. There sure shouldn't be. Now it's like, if you're negotiating the purchase and sale of a property, the project is disclosed. You should know both the potential revenues and the ongoing operations and maintenance costs of the project, and that just goes into the discounted cash flow or the ultimate purchase of the project or the property. I would say there's no question. If and this isn't just for carbon. This is like with anything. If the more encumbrances you have on a property, the more you're going to shrink your pool of potential buyers. So that isn't like a carbon issue. That's an encumbrance issue.
We have a time limit here, so I'm gonna take maybe a couple more questions. If you got just one question.
Yep.
Please.
Absolutely. And this is actually more for the state of New Hampshire. Are these carbon deals disclosed in New Hampshire? And what if I procure, say, a couple thousand acres, and I put it into current use? Then I turn around and flip it out into, calling these fine folks, say, hi, I think I've got some high quality timberland on here. I want to do carbon credits. Does that get reported to the state of New Hampshire anywhere? Does that value of that high quality forest get reported anywhere? Or is it all internally kept and I can make some cash over here from my high quality forest while asking the taxpayers of New Hampshire to subsidize my land? That may be a DAR question or DRA.
So there's the carbon registry. You're aware of that, right? So that was passed by House Bill 123. And what we're doing is contacting the developers. We know the pool of developers that have projects in New Hampshire, and we're asking them for updates. We also have put a form now on our website, in the Division of Forest Lands website, where if landowners are contemplating putting their property in a carbon credit project, they're required to fill out the form and send it to us so we can record that on the state registry. It is it's a law, but we don't have any teeth. We haven't yet put any fines associated with that, and so far so good. But we are trying to chase down a few that we're aware of that haven't reported yet. So we're that's how we're doing it. But yes, if you're going to enroll in a carbon credit program, the law requires that property owner to register their land.
Can you stop that sale or that transfer?
The only intent of the law is to require landowners to register. We don't have any authority in the law to question their intent. If it's a legitimate carbon credit program, we just ask them to divulge the information that's required.
Okay, I'm gonna ask Mark if you've got a question.
I do. Thank you. A couple of things real quick, and I'll try to go real quick. This has been really, really good. Dylan, it's just very good. I mean, we're really learning.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Happy to help.
A couple things. One, I always go back to Chris because Chris has been very consistent with carbon lets you create a higher value forest, basically, is what I hear you saying. And that ultimately lets you generate, I'm supposing, more, if you can increase the value of it, i.e. with the market and stuff like that, the market, you're getting a higher price for. Is that what the implication of what you're saying? So that you're going to be able to create or get as much money, or if not more, if you do the extended rotations or whatever it may be, by integrating carbon in and having a healthier market, so to speak. Is that a correct assumption or not a correct assumption?
You asking Dylan or me?
I'm asking, well, because I'm going to pivot to him in a
Yes,
second, okay? But
think
I
the
want
one-
it because it's important, because you
The
say it over
thing
and over.
So I will speak in very general terms for landowners. We know that landowners have a lot of different
Mhm.
objectives, and that's how you determine as a forester what you want to do, how you help them manage their property. But if their objective is, Dylan mentioned NPV.
Mhm.
And so for many large landowners, that is really an important measure. Once you've taken care of the environmental, and you're doing things under the law, then maximizing that NPV is where you want to be. And so if you can do that through a combination of, say, carbon and implementing higher value products, maybe meeting the market, maybe you don't have a low value market, so if you can grow your trees longer, they'll actually have a market. Yes, then you would generate potentially, you're taking a risk, but you potentially
Right.
generate higher value.
All right, so from a municipality perspective that's relied on this revenue stream, I'm gonna pivot to you, Dylan, right now. You kind of understand the nature of the way it historically has been, and you understand that cash flow from a very real cash flow perspective, what you could expect over, you have a 75-year history. Obviously, you have markets
yeah.
that come up and down, so you know it. So I guess my question to you is, you started your presentation, talking about the taxation directly, and you can understand why if a state had a yield tax and was deriving revenue, that, it would make sense to want to still capture that. You said it's absolutely the trees that are driving, the forest is driving the value of what you do in the world in which you live. So my question is very simply this, and no, you're not an attorney, I know that, but opine a little bit on, we're here because we're concerned that revenue stream that we've relied on for 75 years to balance budgets at a municipal level and fund some different services may go away, it's going to change, it's whatever it may be. What do you suggest? How do you, in the world you live, if you're in our position, where would you try to extract value, so to speak, on in a tax, okay, at what you do? Where would you tax it? Can you tax it? You're saying it's so complicated you can't tax it, or whatever it may be.
Well, I didn't say that. I didn't say that it's so complicated you can't tax it. I just said I think so fair question. I'm sorry, did you wrap up your question?
No, that's good. I'm done.
Okay. I mean, it is complicated. It is complicated because it's not, it's like, what are you selling? You're selling air, right? Or you're selling carbon that's captured in a tree, and it's sort of it's a supply agreement, right? I mean, that's what you've got when you're committing to a when a landowner is participating and committing to a carbon project, they're committing to supplying a given volume of carbon that's in that wood for a given period of time. So I think conceptually it's not that tough, and it is a wood product, and it's carbon. So none of that is tough. The 2 points that I said is that make sure that you're cognizant of it's a hierarchy, right? I mean, if it's a simple spot transaction, great. I mean, then it's probably most similar to to selling timber. That's easy, right? You're selling a commodity on a per unit basis. And again, I'm not making a recommendation. I'm just saying this is something that I think is kind of the easy way to think about it. Is that there's something and there's a thing on a recurring basis that you kind of put your finger on. You can say, the landowner sold X tons of carbon at X price, they generated this much revenue at this given point in time. That's easy, right? What I'm saying is that there are a lot of different ways, there are a lot of different deal structures in the way that the carbon in the forest gets committed and gets sold with regard to what it is and its timing. So, and the thing that you're going to have to surf, is like you don't create some sort of weird perverse incentive that it's like, oh well, New Hampshire, they've got this, they've integrated carbon into their timber tax law, but it's just on spot transactions. So we'll do a little, financial engineering. So we kind of do this workaround. It's like, well, it's an offtake agreement, where this, I'm trying to educate you to just the basics. I'm trying to understand how carbon, not workaround. I mean, these aren't workarounds the way these deal structures have put together. They're really about, really the way that the deal structures came into being was just, trying to reduce barriers to entry for landowners to be able to sell their carbon and participate in the market through sharing costs and distributing risks. And then, lawyers and foresters and accountants got creative in the deal structure. It really didn't have anything, it didn't have much to do with taxes. So there weren't any nefarious intentions about, logging up tons so that so that China could control, forests in Coast County. I mean, that's just not what's going on. But you just have to be really, you've got to know what's being sold and when it's being sold, when these revenue events are. And I'm sympathetic. I mean, I live in a place too. I'm here in, little old Williamsport, Pennsylvania, and I'm very grateful that we've got the Golden Strip here where most of the fast food restaurants are. It keeps my taxes low. I could move, a mile that way and I'd have a third of the land and half the house and I'd pay more taxes. This is a real issue. I get it. Totally get it. I would say just try to understand how these deals work. I would encourage you to not tax a landowner before they've generated revenue. I don't think that's particularly fair. And that's about as far as I can go.
Dylan, thank you. We have another presenter, and in respect to her, I'd like to kind of wrap this up. But
Thank you.
I think
Yeah.
this has been very informative, and thank you very much for your presentation. Can we
All
get
right.
a copy of your presentation?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm going to send this to Christy early next week. I may make a few modifications to it based on some of the questions that I heard today, but I'll get that to you. And it's not confidential. I mean, you can have it for the record. Yeah, and thanks. It's been a pleasure. Thanks for allowing me to speak with you today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Take care, guys.
I'm going to let everybody have take a break while we set up. Yeah. Yep. Okay. Charlie, would you like to introduce Sarah?
Sarah, I'm sure you're going to explain when you came into the carbon world, but I've known Sarah for quite a few years in a role with Forest Carbon Works and Chestnut Carbon. I think you folks were kind of first out of the gate in trying to provide opportunities for carbon sales for family forest owners and you know, kind of started what has been going on, and others have, whether they've copied it or they've developed their own programs. Now it's available a little bit more, but I think you folks were first out in that. And so I think we're going to learn about a program that's been around a while.
Thank you, Charlie. And thank you, Sarah, for being with us.
You're welcome. Hi, everybody. Thank you very much for having me today and this opportunity to be here presenting with you. And like Charlie said, I have been doing this for a while. Not as long as Dylan Jenkins. Very few have, I think. But so again, I'm Sarah Ford. I am the Chief Forestry Officer for Forest Carbon Works, Chestnut Carbon. I am an SAF certified forester and a licensed forester in the state of Vermont. So I live in northern Vermont, where I have been working in forestry and natural resources for over 2 decades now. The majority of my career has been spent working with private forest landowners, and I've been with Forest Carbon Works, Chestnut Carbon for over 5 years, really the last decade, on and off. So today I'm going to spend probably the next 15 minutes just giving a brief overview of who we are at Chestnut Forest Carbon Works, go over a few of our milestones, dive in a bit to our customers, so who's buying our carbon credits, talk a bit about our improved forest management carbon program, and definitely highlight some of the impacts and opportunities from our IFM program to landowners. And plenty of time for questions and discussion at the end. Dylan did a really, really great job, I think, setting the stage for my presentation, where we are now. So just quickly, to give you a little bit of just history of Forest Carbon Works, FCW, and Chestnut Carbon. Like Charlie mentioned, Forest Carbon Works has been working with small private forest landowners for over a decade in the IFM space. While we aren't as large as a company as Finite Carbon, we started actually working in the compliance market back in 2016, focusing on small landowners, which was really innovative and revolutionary at that time, transitioning over to the voluntary market in about 2021. In 2022, we were purchased by Kimmeridge, which is a private equity alternate asset manager company, which launched Chestnut Carbon at that time. And so currently FCW, Forest Carbon Works, is a subsidiary of Chestnut Carbon, hence the 2 names and the 2 brands. We're a hybrid company, so we are about 3/4 remote. We have office space in New York, where about 1/4 of the team is located and working out of right now. But our team is spread across 19 states. And we have a lot of carbon project experience behind us, 75 plus combined years. And over half our team are foresters with quite a significant amount of forestry expertise behind us. And really, we, I think, excel not only at providing these kind of bespoke or tailored solutions in the carbon space, in both improved forest management and afforestation, but really working on a really personal level with our customers and landowners, which I'll talk in some more detail about just a minute. Nope. Little slide frozen, computer frozen. There we go. All right. So I think, like a lot of us in this space, really what we're working to do is support long-term restoration and conservation of forests through carbon markets as a diversified revenue stream to support this and really the communities in which these forests are located. One of the ways that we do this at Forest Carbon Works and Chestnut is through some proprietary technology that we built in-house. This ties directly to the communities where we're located. We have actually a handheld smartphone device that we use to do forest inventory, which I'll share a little bit more detail about that in a minute. But really, just thinking about the benefits of these carbon projects and where we're working, it's just another attribute that you may not always think about. Something else that we've succeeded in doing just as a company with our company at large is growth and scale. And this, what this entails is, I think, really both raising of capital and some of these long-term offtake agreements that Dylan already alluded to in his talk, which is really great, which is really important for the carbon market. The carbon market has had its trials and tribulations, and developers obviously are along for that ride. We are meeting the needs of our buyers. And so the more long-term offtake agreements that we're able to secure in this space, the better this is for us, for our landowners, and for the space as a whole. So something that we have managed to do in the last few years is secure multiple long-term offtake agreements at Chestnut and Forest Carbon Works, 3 of which have been with Microsoft. Speaking of Microsoft, 2 were for 15 years and 1 was for 25 years. So I think that in that, while the space is still maturing, it has actually grown and matured quite a bit in the last 5 years particularly. And I know Dylan definitely hinted at this as he's been in this space for quite some time. But as far as I think just, again, what we're seeing in project development and the ripple effect for landowners and the economies that honestly are subject to these projects. And then just lastly, something else that, again, at Chestnut that we've done, like I said, is we've raised money. I'm not a finance person, but this has been fairly important for the space as we are trying to bring maturity to the space and build these bankable contracts. One thing we did last year was secure a $210 million loan led by JP Morgan with 6 different banks behind it, which was fairly revolutionary for the space, which has helped us to continue to grow, scale, and build more carbon projects behind that. Okay, so our customers, our buyers, these are the clients that we are building our carbon projects for, also our landowners, but ultimately we have to be able to sell the credits to succeed in what we are doing. Our customers at Chestnut and Forest Carbon Works include a blend of financial institutions, technology companies, industrial and energy adjacent buyers. Interestingly, the finance institutions are one of the larger, and tech, of course, as well, are the larger buyers right now in the carbon space. We're really focusing on, I'd say, established and sophisticated buyers with what we're doing at Chestnut specifically. So these are corporates that have net zero commitments, are really hyper-focused on their scope 1, 2, and 3 emissions reductions. And they're using offsets as an additional tool to help them meet their sustainability commitments, whether these are net zero goals and things like that. And so again, carbon offsets are just another, an option or a tool to help them get to where they need to be for their climate reduction goals. Up here, these logos that you're looking at, on the left of the screen, these are our buyers. So we feel that transparency is really important in this space. Carbon is not a commodity, not yet. Hopefully it will be someday. And like you heard already, there is a lack of transparency, which is making it somewhat difficult for this space to mature. There is more transparency than there used to be. So whenever we can, we publish and publicize who our buyers are and the price that we are selling our credits for. So on our website, we have a big list of our buyers. You can see a snapshot of them here. So we've got JP Morgan, Microsoft, TD Bank, Shopify. Mercedes F1. These are just some examples of the corporates that are buying credits from us right now. There are many others out there. Pricing ranges from $30 to mid $30 a ton from these buyers. And this is for improved forest management carbon removal credits. All right, so just a quick overview of actually what we're doing at Chestnut Carbon. We have two different carbon removal project types. So we are only selling removal credits. So for improved forest management, this is under Forest Carbon Works. And these are credits that are based on additional growth of the forest. So we do not sell the reduction credits. Now we all know what these are, which is great. So under Chestnut, we actually have two different IFM projects. One is under the Vera registry and one is under ACR. And again, we work with private U.S. forest owners under this project. We have about 200,000 acres across 39 states in the U.S. So we've been historically focusing on small private forest owners. So landowners ranging from 40 acres in size up to 50,000 plus acres in size. So like Charlie said, we have a pretty large spectrum of landowner sizes that we work with. Our average landowner size is probably around 500 acres. Many of our landowners are smaller in size. These landowners are committing to 40 to 60 years of a contract length that where they will get paid over that duration when they sign up with us. We use the Forest Stewardship Council to certify landowners for sustainable forest management. This is a requirement in the methodologies that we're using for commercial harvesting. We actually have our own Forest Stewardship Council, or FSC group certificate that we hold at Forest Carbon Works Chestnut. So we're managing and covering all the costs for certification for landowners. So we have a really great partnership with FSC, and we think that that's really important, especially we have landowners that are really excited about adding in chain of custody to their harvest practices. On the afforestation side of the business, this is the other big project that we have at Chestnut. So this is under Chestnut Carbon. We are reforesting or afforesting marginal pasture, marginal agricultural lands in the Southeast. We've been doing this for about 4 years. We just barely wrapped up our 4th planting season right now. So currently we own over 90,000 acres across 9 states and have succeeded in reforesting about 70,000 acres with native biodiverse forests. We planted, I think, about 27 different species, so many different hardwood species and 4 different pine species. So this is a really exciting project, having planted over 45 million trees. This is where a lot of our Microsoft contracts are committed to buying a lot of the credits that will ultimately be coming from these forests that we've been building. This project is under the Gold Standard Registry. Just a little bit more detail about how our current IFM program works. So we've recently actually transitioned from the Vera registry over to ACR with what we're currently offering. So we actually have kind of jumped up a little bit in our acreage size that we're working with which we're working with landowners. Still, I would say that any landowner under 5,000 acres, I consider to be relatively small in the carbon space. Historically, carbon markets really have not been very accessible to landowners with less than a few thousand to 5,000 acres of land because of the costs of development. The current offering that we have is a 40-year contract. We do offer quite a bit of harvest flexibility. So I'll jump into that in a minute as far as what that looks like for our landowners. And I think this is obviously pretty relevant to why we're all here today. As far as, I think, like just the compatibility with harvesting and carbon credits and the diversified revenue streams that we're talking about. And this really, there's a lot of variation from one landowner to the next as far as ultimately what that, how you'll see that play out from one individual landowner that's enrolled based on the size of that landowner, the location of that landowner, and honestly, markets surrounding that landowner. Sort of slightly different from finite carbon. We assume all of the development responsibility. So we do own carbon rights for landowners. We sell all of the credits. So we're a little bit more, I'd say, hands-on in that sense than finite is. So when a landowner signs up with us, well, we're trying to make it kind of as hands-off and easy for the landowner as possible, although we definitely want the landowner to meet landowners' forest management objectives. I'd say that is where landowners are most hands-on within our process. A lot of our landowners have existing forest management plans, are in tax programs. My team is a team of professional foresters that are located all over the US. And so we work really heavily in all of the regions where we're located with landowners and their foresters to just facilitate or navigate all of the nuances surrounding forest management needs and compatibility with our carbon program. Here's a map of what our membership looks like. Like I said, we've got about 200,000 acres currently in our carbon projects program. That's across 39 states, about 320 different members. We have one landowner in New Hampshire who enrolled prior to the moratorium, about 830 acres. We have more landowners in Vermont and Maine, neighboring states, but again, they're all pretty small. They're all less than 3,000 acres. I think we've got about 8 total in Vermont and less than 20 in Maine that are more around like the 50 to 200 acre size range. So as you can see, we've got a pretty big spread here in this map. And then I put this in here just as to demonstrate some example harvest treatments, harvest practices in silviculture that are pretty common within our program. And these are photos from landowner properties that where landowners are using carbon revenues to help support forest management in our program. And so this is, I think, more significant with smaller landowners who may have a harder time actually implementing some of these treatments because they have to pay to do these treatments, which are really important for forest health, whether it's fuels reductions, sanitation and salvage treatments, especially at some of the scale of landowners that we're working with. While they're not, there isn't a market, forest products market to support those treatments. Ultimately, this is helping, managing for a more productive, healthy forest in the long term that will actually yield some of these higher value wood products. I wanted to just kind of flag that here. Some of our landowners are not harvesting every year and may not harvest very much at all over the duration of our contract, just given the size of the landowner. We have landowners, one of our largest landowners that are harvesting 2.5 million board feet annually. Again, that's our biggest landowners is in New York State, which they are able to continue doing while meeting the parameters and conditions of our carbon program. And they're also enrolled in the New York current use program, 580A. Quickly back on our MRV, and just I think this is just a really interesting, I think pretty cool component of how we're creating access and also how we work within the communities where we are. And just another layer and added benefit to carbon projects that isn't tied directly to carbon revenues, or it's, I guess, like a step away from carbon revenues. We hire local forest technicians, contract cruisers to do on-the-ground carbon inventories for every single landowner that enrolls with us. So this is a great way to employ locally and also streamline access to carbon markets. The software, it's a photo-based software app that we built in-house and we manage that collects traditional forest inventory measurements. It is registry approved. We use it, and we've audited with it, we pass our carbon audits with this device and software. And it's it's just a really great process that we have been utilizing for years that Forest Carbon Works first developed. We have a similar platform that we built internally for land evaluation and land assessment for the afforestation, reforestation project as well. So on continuing just to speak to some of the benefits from IFM projects, not only to landowners, but also the community at large, which I think I've covered a few of these already, but in addition to carbon revenues and income coming from carbon projects, there's obviously, I think, just one of the biggest benefits from carbon projects is helping to keep forests intact. We have many landowners that are generational forest landowners that are using revenues from their carbon payments to help secure their forests for the next generation. They're putting carbon payments into accounts and holding them there for the next generation to ensure that that forest will stay well managed and that there's some financial mechanism in there to support that. And I'm sure everyone in this room is very familiar with just the challenges right now in maintaining forests, especially some of these larger blocks of forests in the Northeast, especially. Additionally, with just so many changing market conditions, one of the really big focuses right now in improved forest management is, I think, taking more of a kind of a holistic view of improved forest management. And as far as improved forest management, I think has really traditionally been thought of as reducing harvest levels and only reducing harvest levels, but you can also improve how you manage the improved forest management. So managing your forest for resiliency, our changing climate, fuels reduction, forest health, all of these sort of, lower intensity treatments that they cost money to do. And that is another avenue, an opportunity for carbon payments to help support that. That's definitely becoming a very talked about use case, and it's of increasing interest for a lot of landowners of all sizes right now, and which, like I mentioned before, that will being able to utilize carbon payments or for this purpose, or at least well manage our forests in this way, will ultimately help us create and ensure that we have healthy, more productive forests in the long term. Lastly, we do work really extensively with local forestry communities proximate to where all of our projects are located, and hire local foresters whenever we can to help support additional inventory and carbon audits and certification needs as well. So it's another benefit from our projects and carbon projects in general. And then back on the buyer side for a minute, since I know that is definitely of interest, and just thinking about, what is of interest to buyers from projects in the Northeast specifically. We have over 30 different buyers, at least, that we're talking to on our credit sales side of the company at all times. And they're really looking for and interested in some of the, I think, the localized co-benefits, community and storytelling angle, and also just mitigated risk that comes with forests in the Northeast. We don't have the same wildfire risk and other natural disturbance risks that we have in other parts of the country that are in the Northeast. That is really pretty attractive to buyers, and that's what we're marketing with our projects and our individual and grouped landowner projects in the Northeast currently, in addition to the way we've designed our project, which is removals only, which is attractive to buyers, increasingly attractive to buyers. It's a cleaner, easier additionality argument, and other things that are part of the methodology that we're using that Dylan hit on earlier, like the dynamic baseline and labeling that is also incorporated within that. So I think, I mean, that's pretty much all that I had. I really just wanted to kind of focus on what we're doing, a lot of the benefits that we're seeing to the surrounding landscape, and we see to the surrounding landscape and landowners, and also just a little bit about who our target customers and buyers are. This last slide is actually a quote from a landowner in northern Vermont that I've worked with for over a decade. They're in the Vermont Current Use Program. You can do both, and I'm happy to explain how that can and cannot work, because it does not always work. I've done a lot of work with the Private Lands Advisory Committee in the state of Vermont, and I think it's a really important issue to consider. And I would just say that, you know, having worked with landowners for the entirety of my career, enabling them to continue to conserve and well manage their forests with diversified revenue streams like carbon credits and carbon payments is honestly really, really rewarding. And I know that it's the same for a lot of my team. So yeah, so thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Sarah, I'd like to start with, I have a question. How does Chestnut Forest Carbon Works, how do you deal with leakage? Does that
Yeah.
come up?
Yeah, so we have, there's two ways that we look at leakage. One is activity shifting and one is market shifting. And so our methodology that we use has a no activity shifting leakage requirement. And so to ensure that there is not any activity shifting leakage, what we were doing under Vera was requiring landowners to enroll all of their land. And so activity shifting leakage means that when you enroll in a carbon project, if you don't enroll all of your land, you could increase harvest activities on the land that you don't enroll. So if you just enroll all of the land in the carbon project, that very easily takes care of that. Now, under our new methodology and the new registry that we're working with, ACR, you do not have to enroll all of your land, which is honestly a lot, I'd say, more palatable for landowners. This has been a big hurdle for us and for working with landowners of many different sizes specifically. It can be hard to have to enroll every single tract of forest that you own in a carbon project. The land that is not enrolled in the carbon project, we have to monitor that with the landowner from the point that it is enrolled forward, just to simply to ensure that harvest levels do not increase on that land. If there's no harvesting occurring, that's pretty easy. If you are harvesting already, we do that via certification, forest management plans. I think systems that many landowners already have in place who are harvesting. We also have some remote monitoring that we use. All developers are using some form of remote monitoring to track changes in forest cover, to help track also harvest levels on that land that is not enrolled. So that's activity shifting leakage.
Yeah, well, let me just let her
Yeah.
finish.
Yeah, sure.
You said that you monitor the rest of the land, make sure
Yep.
harvesting doesn't increase. Is that doesn't increase above their planned level? If they already had an increased plan, would that
It's increased from the time at which the project starts. So that's a great question. Yep. The other leakage is market shifting leakage. And so that is an automatic deduction that's taken from the amount that you're credited. So that's a part of the formula in the methodology that the registry has already assigned that based on the size of the landowner, essentially. So you do lose a certain amount of crediting because they're assuming there's a certain amount of market shifting leakage that's occurring as a result of the project. And so this is honestly very much debated because some landowners, it's a sacrifice you have to make as a landowner because there might actually be no market shifting leakage as a result of you enrolling in the carbon project. For smaller landowners specifically, who potentially are not harvesting a lot or are not, there might not be a significant change in their harvest levels. It's a really nuanced, very nuanced whole thing. There has been some recent research out supporting, I'd say that the University of Maine actually just put out that better supports the current market shifting leakage deduction that is in the ACR methodology we're using. However, it's really complicated.
Okay. Did you have a question? Thank you.
I did, and thank you for taking my question. Dealing with some of the smaller landowners like you do, and with property volatility and economic factors, what happens if a person is in a 40-year program and their land goes into foreclosure?
So the carbon contract, the carbon contracts that we put in place are, we actually put an MOA on the deed of the land. So the contract, so it is an encumbrance, and that contract would stay attached to the deed of the land. So it ultimately would depend. It's a great question. The payment distribution would be subject. However, okay, let me back up a little. At this point, we are issuing title reports for our landowners to try to get ahead of some issues like that, to look at, to understand, I'd say some potential financial issues that could result in a property going into foreclosure. The landowner, from the point at which they enroll in the carbon project, they have no financial responsibility to us. As far as the land itself, that's a great question. I'm not sure I can 100% answer that. I'll have to get back to you.
Yes.
As we're sitting here talking, the second question is, and again, I don't expect probably you have the answer, but if a property doesn't go in foreclosure but is taken for tax lien, no matter what happens, if you think your first position, you're always second position to the town. With your MOU.
We right. Liens are one thing that we will not accept on a property prior to enrolling with us. So we do look for and screen for any existing liens on a property. And we do require property landowners to be current on their taxes as well. So if a property, I would say, just thinking about the order of operations, if a property went into foreclosure, had a tax lien on it, we reserve the right to terminate a project at any time as well. So I think it would ultimately depend on, exactly the circumstances surrounding that foreclosure, how long it were to be in foreclosure for, or ultimately, what the circumstances of the tax lien would subject the property to if we ultimately wanted and needed to cancel the project, or if the property would ultimately change hands, that would allow us to just continue meeting the requirements for credit issuance from 1 year to the next. So it would depend on the duration of the foreclosure and or the lien. Yeah. And so I'd have to check with the registry to be able to fully answer that question.
Go ahead. Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Sarah. Chestnut and finite are kind of the gold standards. You operate above board, in full daylight. I run the New Hampshire Home Builders Association, and we have a lot of chuck with a truck who kind of come in and just going to help you out and end up screwing you. In my interpretation from the research I did, that these carbon credits kind of fall in that middle, almost gray area. they're not considered a commodity as in traded, but yet you have 30 companies that view this strongly as an investment. How do you square, a New Hampshire farm or a New Hampshire landowner who has 500 acres that wants to use the credit to keep their land and kind of, do snowmobiling and do things like that on that versus, some of these companies that view this as an investment to both socially and financially. And do other states require you folks to register as a commodities broker? And how do you folks view this as a commodity or just helping somebody out? Because I'm trying to find a way to hold accountable those chuck with a truck. We're going to say, I can get you carbon credits. And then the other part, we're talking about commodities and futures. Do you view biochar as an emerging market? And will that kind of change the landscape of where we're at now? And should this commission bring into the value of biochar, those low quality forests? Sorry.
All great questions.
I did my
So-
homework last night. Too much caffeine, way too much caffeine.
Okay, so we are not registered as a commodities broker. As far as some of the details on, how we're surrounding that, I can't fully answer that either. However, as far as what is investable and what is not, I think what we always tell people, and whether it's landowners, investors, banks, and with carbon credits is, and I think a lot of what has been attractive about us and Finite, honestly, is who we are as a company. And, that's what people are investing in. While the carbon credit is what they're getting out of that investment, they're investing in Chestnut Carbon, they're investing in Finite Carbon. That is hugely important as far as landowner security. And, there's a lot, there's a huge spectrum of quality out there. And I think when there are things like this Microsoft announcement about pausing carbon removal purchases, it only honestly helps to level out the space. Those developers and those players that are newer and maybe not yet so investable, we'll see, I think, a bit of a cleaning up of the carbon development space as a result. And so for credit investment, our investors and honestly the banks that have invested in who we are as Chestnut, they're investing in our team, our history of project development, and our ability to build these bankable contracts and deliver. Delivery is massive. The process of carbon project development is very complicated, and it's hard, between actually measuring the carbon, quantifying the carbon, going through the registration and audit process, issuing the credits and paying the landowners. And we've done this multiple times. That's investable. And also, what is it that you're selling the landowner? Is it a real worthwhile product? Is it something you're asking a landowner to commit for 40 years, sometimes more than 40 years? Does that commitment make sense for the landowners? There's many different types of programs out there, and some of them make a lot more sense to landowners than others. They all say they're going to generate credits, and they all say they're going to be paying landowners, but I think some are going to succeed a lot better than others at doing this. And we're starting to see, I think kind of like an ebbs and flows and, evolution and how that's working. On biochar, yes, I do think that is very much starting to be an up and coming and important new space. We are looking at biochar right now. And in the Southeast, especially in the absence of markets, pulp and paper market down there, and I know their volumes are very small relatively, that biochar will ultimately backfill, but the pricing for biochar per ton of the actual raw material and or a biochar credit right now are just about equivalent. And so there's quite a bit of momentum in biochar in the Southeast right now. So it's certainly something to pay attention to, I would say. Yeah.
I'm gonna allow one more question.
Thank you. Thank you, Sarah. It's very, very good, very informative. I had a question for you, though. I was reading the news, I'm online reading the news in my, I want to say it was my on Google, okay, their browser, Chrome. And I get paid to grow your trees. It's right here. And it comes up all the time. And I mean, that Dylan talked about it as well. You know, it's perfectly logically a landowner, if you can have another revenue stream, then go try to, what's it all about? My question is from a marketing perspective, though, and I think I asked this before, but another entity was here a couple times ago. How much marketing, how aggressive are you? I would assume you have a marketing budget. How do you interface, how do you get find where, your customers?
So we do digital marketing, a fair amount, but we are most successful in finding our customers, honestly, through our foresters right now, through the events that I used to see Charlie at, forestry conferences. We are at events a lot. Forest Carbon Works, that's the Forest Carbon Works team. We are known in the space now for having been consistently at forestry and landowner events for the last 5 years. And we have a really strong relationship network and trust in the space. And whether via foresters bringing us clients or meeting landowners at these events and other conservation agencies as well. We send out targeted mailers as well, which again, the foresters in my team are like postcards, are putting a lot of work into kind of designing these. And they're just full transparency. Again, we are not sending them to New Hampshire right now, of course. But yeah, so really kind of what I'd call, more just very older styles of outreach that's a lot more successful in this space, and then phone calls.
Seeing no more questions, we're gonna let you off the hot seat.
Okay.
Thank you, Sarah. That was very, very informative.
Thank you all very much.
Looking at the clock, I think our next agenda item, review of commission legislative charge, that is very important, and we're gonna need some time to speak on that. I'd like to start off our next meeting with that. And also at our next meeting, I think it might be worthwhile to go over what the New Hampshire Constitution says about standing timber, review timber tax, the RSA, and I think we could fill a block with that just to get everybody on the same page. So if everybody's okay with that, we'll move that to the next agenda. Any other business? Seeing none. Schedule next meeting. I'm looking at May 22nd. It's a Friday here at 10 o'clock. Is everybody okay with that? Oh, no, okay, I'm sorry. Are we doing on the 29th?
What's wrong with the 22nd?
It's
Holiday weekend.
yeah.
What holiday?
Memorial Day?
Memorial Day is gonna be the
Next
last weekend of May, not the third one. I think it's the 20, should be the 29th.
Well, this says Memorial Day is the 25th.
It is.
So, because the next Monday
Right.
is the first.
Is June,
Yeah.
right.
Okay.
Memorial Day's early.
Early, yep, okay.
Okay. Is everybody okay with that? May 29th, Friday at 10?
Oh, okay.
Oh. Okay. Yeah. June 5th? Is that?
You're okay, Arnie, keep going.
Okay,
Yes.
June 5th. It's a Friday. We good with that, Christie? Okay. June 5th, it's a Friday. I can't do it before. If we can't do it the 22nd, the Friday before that, I can't. I won't be here. And last item, I get a motion to adjourn.
So many. Second.
All those in favor? Aye.